Where are you listening from? Somewhere under the Florida sun, the windy stretch of central Texas, or maybe a small town all the way up in Alaska? At this age, I like knowing which corner of America my voice is reaching. I have spent more than 12 years working in sub-zero rooms, yet somehow that afternoon, the coldest place I had ever stood was the conference room. My name is Elise Hartman, 43 years old, Senior Cold Chain Operations Specialist. I am the one responsible for the entire cold chain across the Boston region, from storage temperatures to load control, from federal FDA requirements to ensuring every box of seafood and frozen goods arrives exactly the way it should. No one sees my work, but if anything slips by even 1 degree, the company loses millions and faces an immediate recall. But that afternoon in the conference room, I felt like a stranger inside the system I had kept intact for more than a decade. The glass walls overlooking the Boston harbor looked bright, yet the air felt heavy, the kind of cold fog that settles before a storm. Chairs pulled back, silence everywhere, and Gregory Lowell, the regional director, stood at the head of the table wearing that familiar confidence. The kind held by people who believe everything revolves around them, even when they barely understand what they are holding. Gregory opened the meeting with that ceremonial tone I had heard for 12 years, though I had never believed it. Today, we introduced the new Regional Operations Director. I lowered my eyes to my worn black notebook to avoid the looks drifting toward me. I knew I was the obvious choice. I built this system. I saved the company from 3 federal audits in 2 years. None of it made the reports, but everyone knew. Or at least, that is what I thought. Then Gregory smiled. The new appointee is Chloe Lowell. The room paused for a beat, like a cold storage unit losing power for 1 second. Then polite applause followed. Mandatory applause, not enthusiastic. I clapped too, slow, steady, calm, but sharp. Chloe stood up, her face flushed as she nodded at everyone. 24. Fresh marketing graduate, 3 months of internship in this very office, and now operations director. I watched her shake hands politely and neatly. It was not her fault. Any young person given an opportunity like that would be excited. The problem was not Chloe. It was the expectations Gregory placed on someone who had never worked a warehouse shift longer than an hour. When the applause faded, Gregory turned to me. His voice sounded like a dull knife, too blunt to hurt immediately, sharp enough to cut over time. Elise will transition into a support and advisory role for Chloe during the handover. Advisor. That word landed heavier than a block of ice. It meant I would have to train her from the ground up, teaching procedures so critical that without me, the entire system would collapse overnight. I looked at Gregory. He avoided my eyes, something he rarely did. I asked as evenly as possible. And what exactly does my support role include? He straightened his tie and delivered vague lines about reports, metrics, and helping Chloe understand the supply chain. Polished words hide the truth. I was being pushed out of the position I had built piece by piece for 12 years. I watched Chloe. She stood near the monitor, studying the temperature dashboard like an expert-level puzzle. Even the way she held her pen, hesitant and scribbling meaningless notes, told me everything. She was polite and hardworking, but she lacked what people in this field call cold chain instincts. Midnight recalls, 5 a.m. emergency FDA inspections, drivers stranded in Maine with a load that needed rerouting in 40 minutes. Chloe had never faced any of that. The meeting went on without me. I watched the colorful slides Gregory prepared for his daughter, a pretty structure built on a foundation no one bothered to check. That was what worried me most. Near the end, Gregory said I had done a good job through the years, and that it was time for the younger generation to lead. He said it without looking at me. People call that an organizational update. I call it rewriting history to benefit the writer. I closed my notebook and slipped it into my coat pocket. Not angry, not shocked, just aware the room had dropped 1 more degree. My new role was a placeholder, a shadow, something to keep me still until they figured out how to remove me entirely. I walked out of the conference room with the familiar feeling of a cold chain malfunction. Except this time, the failure was not in the warehouse. It was in management. And as the glass door slid shut behind me, one clear thought surfaced in my mind, sharp as the sound of a pen hitting a desk. A company never fears the storm. It fears the cracks hiding beneath the fresh coat of paint. If you have ever stayed at a company for too long, you know this feeling. One day, when everything falls apart under the person who just got promoted, they will ask why a process that complicated ran so smoothly for so many years. That is when they discover someone had been holding everything together, someone who never appeared in reports or on PowerPoint slides. I was that person for 12 years, in Boston, in a cold chain industry where a half-degree Celsius is more terrifying than winter itself. When I first joined the company, I was just a temperature control technician. The title sounded small, but it was the lifeline of the entire premium food distribution network. We supplied restaurants, hotels, and hospitals, and a single temperature slip in a freezer, a pallet left on the dock for a few minutes, or a truck failing inspection could trigger a federal recall. I witnessed 3 such moments in 12 years, and each time I was the one who saved the company without anyone knowing. The first time, a shipment of seafood from Maine was suspected of contamination. If I had not checked the backup temperature logs, we would have destroyed tens of tons of product and paid damages to 5 major restaurants. I remember the department head at the time walking past me as I reviewed the temperature board, taking the report, and telling leadership he had caught the issue early. I nodded. I did not need anyone to know my name. I only needed the system to run correctly. The second time, a refrigerated truck from Vermont had an 18-minute malfunction on the road. No one noticed except me. I monitored a dozen routes a day, but those 18 minutes made me stand still in front of the screen for the rest of my shift. When I realized the driver had not reported it, I rebuilt the route, checked the cold compartment sensors, and called the customer before they opened the shipment. The load was held, tested, and ultimately cleared. No one thanked me. But no one was sued either. That was enough for me. The third time is the one I cannot forget. The FDA prepared for a surprise inspection. If you have ever worked in food distribution, you know a surprise inspection feels like a storm hitting the building. Every document must be spotless. Every process must match the company's promises perfectly. I rewrote the entire operations manual in 3 days, reorganized the temperature flow, and installed new sensors in places no one had ever bothered to check. When the inspectors arrived, they said our cold storage was one of the most stable systems in the Northeast. Gregory took the credit. He stood in front of leadership, smiling widely, as if he had personally installed every sensor by hand. I stood at the end of the hallway with a cup of cold coffee and thought, new paint over an old wall. It looks good, but only for a while. Aside from those moments, the rest of the 12 years were late nights when the cold storage malfunctioned, unexpected inspections at 4 in the morning, and calls from drivers stuck in snowstorms. Every incident was a small crack I had to seal. I was no hero. I was simply someone who refused to watch the work of an entire team collapse. Speaking of my team, they knew I did more than the company ever asked for. They respected me quietly. On mornings when I arrived early, they always had a cup of hot tea waiting on my desk. No one said anything, but they understood. They knew who carried the weight of the system. Sometimes a young technician would say softly, "If it were not for you, this warehouse would have shut down long ago." I would just smile and say, "It is the job." Their silence was not cowardice. It was fear of losing their jobs, fear of change, fear of being seen as troublemakers. In family-run companies like this, everyone fears upsetting the ones in power. Everyone knew Gregory loved praise and hated the truth. Everyone knew. No one said it, not even me. Outside of work, my life revolved around my mother. She had stage 2 Alzheimer's. Like a clock that had lost its rhythm, a piece of her memory fell away every day. At night, I went from checking freezer temperatures to checking the temperature of her bathwater. I tracked her medication the same way I tracked at-risk shipments. Gregory never knew. He only knew I asked to leave early on the last Fridays of the month. He thought it was a weakness. I saw it as a responsibility. I lived like that for 12 years. Careful, quiet, always off stage. People saw the company grow and assumed it was the work of leadership. They never saw the midnight emails, the pre-dawn reports, or the crises I stopped before they exploded. I was the one doing everything no one saw and no one remembered. But the Elise from 12 years ago was not the Elise standing in the room on promotion day. When I watched Chloe step onto the platform to accept the position that should have been mine, I knew my silence had ended. Not because I wanted to rebel, but because I finally saw the truth I had been pretending not to see for 12 years. A company can survive on silent workers, but it collapses under delusional leaders. I had hidden the truth for 12 years. The truth is that this system only worked because I was there. And when I stood up, the truth would speak for itself. I would not have to say a single word. I first met Chloe on a Monday morning, the kind of Boston weather where the sky turns gray and the wind feels like it is trying to shove someone's responsibilities into the ocean. She walked into my office wearing a smile so wide it made her brand new ID badge look like a decoration. I had seen many young hires enter the cold chain world, but Chloe was different. Not because of skill, but because everyone in the building looked at her with a quiet sort of expectation, as if the story had already been written and the rest of us were only supporting roles. Chloe introduced herself with clean, practiced confidence. Her voice carried the kind of tone that makes people want to believe she knows exactly what she is doing. But confidence comes from only two places: experience or the illusions of youth. I was not ready to judge. Older workers should respect the journeys of younger ones, even when those journeys are rolled out on a velvet carpet. That morning, I spent over an hour showing Chloe how to read cold storage temperature reports, container tracking sheets, and the mandatory federal requirements for frozen goods. She nodded with determination, took tidy notes, and even asked a few well-phrased questions. Everything seemed fine until I asked her to review a temperature log from a container that had just left Newark. She stared at the screen for nearly 3 full minutes, like she was trying to solve a riddle with no clear question. I did not laugh. I simply turned the screen toward me and explained each section. I never belittle anyone who is learning. I only hid the faintest sarcastic smile when Chloe exhaled like she had survived an explosion. So her confidence came from youth. I recognized it. I had been the same until the industry slapped me hard enough to show me exactly where reality hurts. In the weeks that followed, Chloe worked under my supervision. More accurately, I stood behind her more than I had with any other new hire. She had a solid theoretical foundation. I will give her that. She understood terminology and knew how the system looked on paper. She was diligent. But the cold chain does not operate on paper. It operates on sudden changes, delayed containers, and freezer rooms that must be fixed in 5 minutes before entire inventories collapse. Theory does not save anyone when the alarms start flashing. Once, I asked Chloe to handle a temperature alert from the Cambridge warehouse. Those alerts usually come from one of two causes: a faulty sensor or a freezer door not shut tight. Chloe chose to draft an email to the technical department with 3 polite questions. I had to intercept it because a few minutes of delay could cost us 6 pallets of imported beef. I drove with her to the warehouse, solved the issue in 7 minutes, and returned to the office just in time to find her still writing the fourth question. It was not her fault. No one had taught her the survival instincts of this industry. I understood that. What I did not understand was why Gregory believed she was ready for a role whose complexity he himself did not grasp. One afternoon, Gregory called me into his office. He sat behind his glossy wooden desk, his expression carrying the kind of confidence built on title rather than expertise. He told me to start handing over key procedures to Chloe, speaking lightly as though asking me to pick the flavor of coffee for tomorrow's meeting. I asked what I should hand over first. He said, "Whatever you think matters." I looked at him for 3 seconds and knew instantly he had no idea what my work actually included. Gregory continued talking about the future of new faces, young energy, and how we needed to be bolder. Every word was light, yet every word carried a cold truth. The path had already been drawn. My role would shrink while Chloe's expanded in ways only a family connection could secure. Walking out of his office, I saw Chloe standing in the hallway holding a thin stack of documents. She smiled when she saw me, an honest smile. Nothing forced. It eased something inside me. Chloe was not the problem. The problem was the throne someone else had built for her. The next day, I began handing over a few small procedures, partly to follow instructions, partly to see what Gregory truly wanted. Chloe received everything with an effort I respected. But after 3 days, the truth was undeniable. No matter how hard she worked, she could not lead a system she had never faced under real pressure. I continued training her patiently, adding small touches of dry humor to keep the air from tightening too much. She would laugh, though sometimes uncertain whether I was joking. But watching Gregory stroll through the office, glance at my room without stopping, then head straight to Chloe's desk with a satisfied look told me everything. The direction had been chosen long before. I was only being kept long enough to fill the gaps they had not patched yet. One evening, as I shut down my computer, Chloe asked me a small question. Elise, do you think I can really do this job? I looked into her young eyes, the eyes of someone who still believes the world moves fairly. I did not lie, but I was not cruel. I said, you will learn a great deal. And sometimes learning is not something you choose. It is something circumstances choose for you. She did not understand it yet, but she would. I turned off the lights and stepped outside. The Boston wind was still cold, as it always is. But I knew one thing with absolute clarity. I was not part of their future, and I had begun to wonder whether it was time to start writing a future of my own. Some sentences are not meant for you to hear, yet once you hear them, you can never return to who you were. I have overheard countless arguments between management and the cold storage team over 12 years. But that evening, I only needed one sentence to feel something shift inside me, like ice cracking beneath my feet. That afternoon, Boston was colder than usual. I stayed late to finish the weekly temperature control report, something Chloe still had not mastered. The building was nearly empty, lit only by the dim yellow glow spilling across the tile floors. I was heading toward the printer room when I passed Gregory's office and heard his voice. It no longer carried its usual loud politeness. It was the quiet tone of a man saying something he did not want anyone else to know. Gregory was speaking to someone on the other end of a call, likely someone on the board. His voice was low, but every word was clear, as if the room had been designed to carry sound outward. Elise will behave. She needs the money for her mother. I stopped. In the first second, I thought I misheard. In the second, I knew I had not. And in the third, I understood I had crossed a threshold, the kind you cannot step back from once you realize you are on the other side. I do not know how long I stood outside his door. I only know this. What I felt was not anger. Anger is simple. What I felt was a quiet kind of breaking, like touching a wall you have leaned on your whole life and discovering it is hollow inside. Gregory kept talking. He said I would continue supporting, that I was reliable, that I was not the type to cause trouble. None of those lines was meant as praise. They were meant to box me into a role he believed I would remain in because I had a mother to care for, bills to pay, and worries he thought were chains around my wrists. I stepped back from the door carefully, silently, without letting the tiles make a sound. I did not want him to know I heard. I did not want anyone to know I stood there. Silence is not weakness. Silence is data. And I have always lived by data. Back at my small office, I turned on the light. My desk was still organized. My notes are still pinned with shipment codes and inspection schedules. Everything looked the same except for me. I sat down, feeling my heartbeat remain steady. No shaking, no rush. Just the clear understanding that I had been misjudged for too long, and the person misjudging me believed I would always bow my head. I did not sleep that night. I went home close to 10. My mother was on the sofa, staring at the blank wall with her familiar confusion. I covered her with a blanket, placed my hand on her shoulder. Her hand was cold but peaceful. I thought about all the years I fought to keep everything together, so she lacked nothing, so my job never fell apart, so life did not collapse. I thought about what I had given and what I had received in return. I stayed awake until 3 in the morning. Not to cry, I am not that kind of person. I simply lay there, staring at the ceiling. When the sun began to rise, I knew something with absolute clarity. For 12 years, I had been the one who kept everything standing. Every time the cold storage malfunctioned, every time shipments showed warning signs, every time a new employee struggled, I was the one who stepped in. I held the system together through knowledge, through instinct, through calm. But in Gregory's eyes, all of that had turned into a leverage point. He mistook my silence for fear. He mistook my steadiness for submission. And he believed I would never leave. The truth is this. Once people think they hold a small flashlight over your life, they forget you carry an entire sun of your own. The second night, sleep still would not come. Not because of Gregory's sentence, but because clarity had begun falling into place like numbers aligned in perfect order. I had allowed myself to be treated as a component in his system. I had let others use my family responsibilities as a way to keep me still. I had let my loyalty be mistaken for obedience. By the third night, I was no longer restless. I knew exactly what needed to happen. Not a threat, not a confrontation, only the decision to walk away from a place that no longer valued the presence that kept it alive. I wrote the first 2 lines of my resignation on a scrap of paper. Just 2 lines, yet they made me lighter than I had felt in days. I will resign. I will step aside and let them see what they believe is stable. I folded the paper and placed it in my drawer. Tomorrow I will finish it, and I would submit it. No one could stop it. No one could use my mother as a reason to hold me down again. Some departures do not need tears. Some endings do not need announcements. They only need one deep moment of clarity where you realize you have closed a chapter others thought would trap you forever. And I knew this. The moment I walked out, the system I had held together would finally have to prove whether it could stand without me. I was not seeking revenge. I was simply standing up from a chair that Hay thought I would never leave. I arrived at the office earlier than usual on Monday morning. Boston was still trapped in fog, and gray clouds curled above the Charles River like someone else's unfinished night. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and reread the final line of the resignation letter I had written after 3 sleepless nights. No matter how many times I looked at it, the words stayed the same, calmer than I was. I did not change anything. 12 years of unseen work, uncredited effort, collapsed neatly into a letter not even 1 full page long. I printed it, slipped it into an envelope, and placed it on my desk. Touching the edge of the paper felt like placing down a stone I had carried for far too long, simply because I once believed I had no other option. But this morning, my back felt lighter, so unfamiliar that I wondered if I had grown used to a weight that was never meant to stay. Gregory arrived later than usual. He walked down the hallway with the busy posture of someone who wants the world to think he is needed. I tapped lightly on his glass door. When he looked up, I handed him the envelope. He barely paid attention until he saw the lettering in the corner. His eyes blinked once, then again, as if his mind had just received incorrect data. He opened it immediately, read quickly, then stared at me as though I had thrown a block of ice at his face. "Elise, what is this?" His voice mixed feigned seriousness with a hint of panic. He tried to bury beneath performance. I answered as gently as discussing the weather. "I am resigning. I will hand everything over in 2 weeks." Gregory forced a smile. "Elise, can we talk privately?" I nodded. He closed the door, pulled his chair closer, and crossed his arms. His voice softened in a way that felt rehearsed. "I know last week may have been abrupt. I know you were disappointed about the position. But everything has a reason. I think you understand that," I replied calmly. "I understand perfectly." He flinched at the certainty in my tone. "Elise, you are the backbone of this department," he said slowly, as if shaping each word to keep me in place. "If you leave now, you will only hurt yourself. You are caring for your mother. I know things are not easy for you." Every line he spoke echoed the sentence I had overheard in the mirrored room. The same tone, the same confidence that I would obey because I needed the paycheck. I gave him a quiet smile. "Money matters, Gregory, but not enough for me to trade away my self-respect." His expression shifted as quickly as flipping a switch. "So you are really doing this. You are leaving because you did not get promoted. You call 12 years of being dismissed not being promoted." I answered, without changing my breath. He froze for a moment. Then he tried another tactic. "If you walk out like this, I cannot guarantee you a good reference. Other companies will ask about you. Are you sure you want that?" I stayed silent. That silence unsettled him more than any argument could. "Elise, you are making a serious mistake." I stood straight, hands resting lightly in front of me. No tension, no anger, no need to prove anything. I let him hear his own voice. After a few restless seconds, he added one more line, harsher. "You think leaving will matter. You think this department needs you that much. You think you cannot be replaced." I looked him directly in the eye. "Everyone can be replaced. Not everyone can carry the consequences. Gregory frowned. Elise, I think you are threatening me. I shook my head. No, I am telling the truth. He inhaled sharply, then stood up suddenly. You have 2 weeks, but do not expect me to help you find another job. I nodded. I had never needed his help. When I stepped out of his office, Chloe was standing at the end of the hallway. Her face paled when she saw the envelope no longer in my hand. Elise, did you? I nodded. Her eyes widened as if she had witnessed a live wire burn open. But you. You have not taught me the full cold storage system, the weekly reports. I am not, I said softly. I will hand everything over in 2 weeks. I will leave everything as clear as possible. But the rest you will have to learn on your own. Chloe swallowed hard. I did not think it would. I am sorry if I cut her off. You have nothing to apologize for. None of this is your fault. She looked down at her shoes, her hands twisting together. Looking at her, I saw a trace of myself from 12 years ago. Except for one difference. I climbed my way up. She had been lifted into a role she was never prepared for. I returned to my desk. I sorted important documents, closed my laptop, and packed the small personal things I had kept for years without realizing how much they meant. A mug printed with the Longfellow Bridge, a tiny photo of my mother back when her mind was still sharp, a folder thick with handwritten notes on cold storage failures I had fixed again and again. For some reason, placing them into a cardboard box brought no bitterness, only clarity. A clarity I had been avoiding. As I walked past the operations floor, a few employees looked at me as if wanting to speak, then remained quiet. Perhaps they knew. Perhaps they did not dare to say it. Either way, they understood silence was the most honest farewell in a place like this. I stepped out of the building's front doors. No one chased me. No dramatic scenes. Only the hiss of a bus braking on the avenue and the cold Boston wind cutting through my collar. I breathed deeply before stepping down the concrete stairs. I did not say goodbye. No one needed to hear it, and I did not need to speak it. I left in silence. But I knew that silence would echo louder than any protest ever could, because sometimes the loudest sound comes from the person who no longer stands there at all. The morning I left Boston, the city was wrapped in a thin layer of fog, like someone had thrown a soft scarf over it before dawn, fully arrived. I pulled my suitcase down the concrete steps and looked back once. Nothing special, just a gray office building where I had stayed late, so many nights that even the security guards knew my name. A place that had taken 12 years of my life. The flight to Chicago was on time. I sat by the window, feeling the strange weightlessness of someone who has just stepped out of a house quietly burning. Not because I wanted it to burn, but because I knew I had done everything expected of a person who sees the flames early. Chicago appeared beneath me like a web of silver steel. I stepped out of the airport and pulled my coat close. The cold here had its own personality. It did not hide, it did not negotiate, it hit your face straight on and reminded you that you were now in the Midwest. The interview room was on the 16th floor of a building facing Lake Michigan. The company was a national food distributor. I had spoken with them the week before. When I walked in, the regional operations director, a woman named Patricia, shook my hand. Her grip was firm, the grip of someone who makes difficult decisions as part of her morning routine. She led me into the conference room. Her first question was one I did not expect. Elise, I reviewed your file, but I want to know why you chose to leave a place you stayed for 12 years. I did not answer immediately. I told her the truth, brief, even. That sometimes your real value is not in the place you stayed the longest, but in the place that actually understands what you do. Patricia smiled the way only women who know more than they say can smile. Some women need only 2 sentences to understand what story you are really telling. After the interview, she asked me to stay and speak with the operations team. The questions they asked made one thing clear. They needed someone who knew the system from cold storage to federal reporting, not a name to decorate a staffing chart. Leaving the room, I had the feeling I had just stepped into a new life. As I walked down the hallway, my phone buzzed. I glanced at it. 5 missed calls from the old office. Not Gregory, not Chloe. People I had worked with for many years. I did not answer. I already knew what had happened within hours of my disappearance from their operational map. By late afternoon, I received the first email from the Boston technical team. The first line hit me instantly. Cold storage unit 3 is off by 2 degrees. I exhaled. Unit 3 was the most temperamental child in the system. It always needed monitoring because its sensors drifted when the outdoor temperature swung too fast. I had said this for 3 years. No one documented it. I did. Another email arrived. The alarm issued 3 alerts, but no one checked them. I could see it clearly. 3 small red lights are blinking like someone coughing in the corner, while everyone pretends not to notice. The rest of the staff had always believed that was my job. I once called it the alarm only I could hear. Less than an hour later, an email from Chloe arrived. Her first line trembled. Elise, I need help with the HACCP file for this morning's shipment. I opened the attachment. She had misunderstood the entire code table. The temperature control points and critical limits were wrong. If that file had been sent, the customer safety department would have called within minutes. I knew because I had taken those calls myself. I did not reply, not out of bitterness, but because I no longer belonged to that place. Around 4 in the afternoon, my phone lit up with a message from a New England federal office. An FDA inspector is requesting additional temperature logs from the Boston cold storage for the week. I knew exactly what that meant. The FDA does not reach out because they are bored. They call when the data is wrong, when someone has reported an anomaly. A part of me wanted to send one line of guidance, but I did not. I remembered the night 3 days earlier when Gregory said I would obey because I needed money to care for my mother. Silence has a strange gravity. It is not revenge. It is the end of a responsibility that lasted too long. I left the building as sunset spread across Lake Michigan. The water rippled, carrying a cold, metallic scent. I walked along the lakeside path, feeling lighter than I had in 12 years, as if I had finally set down a block of frozen cargo I had carried on my back far too long. I thought about Chloe. I knew she was panicking. She was not a bad person, just someone who had never stood inside a cold storage room at 2 in the morning, fixing a sensor because millions of dollars of frozen product could spoil in 30 minutes. No one had taught her that, and Gregory would never accept blame. I sat on a wooden bench facing the lake. My phone screen glowed with new emails. I turned off every notification. The Chicago sky shifted into pale violet, and the wind continued hitting my face. The first day without me in Boston was louder than all my 12 years working there, and I understood something. The work I did never needed applause. It only needed to be seen. That evening, I ate a bowl of hot soup in a small restaurant near my hotel, feeling a peace so unfamiliar it almost startled me. If someone had asked whether I worried about my old company, I would have told the truth. I worry about the people, but not the system, because it was built on the assumption that I would always be there, and today, that assumption is wrong. The first day without Elise had only begun, but for me, it was the first day the future finally had a clear shape. 2 days after I arrived in Chicago for my final round of interviews, Boston began shaking in the technical sense of the cold chain industry. A department that could not afford a single misplaced decimal was suddenly running like a team, learning the job for the first time. I sat in the lobby of the new company's building, looking out through the tall glass at Lake Michigan, shimmering in the morning light, and just then my phone vibrated nonstop as if the past did not want to release its grip on me. But I had chosen silence. According to the shared inbox I still had limited access to, the sensors in the Boston cold storage facility had recorded a temperature drift of 2 degrees above standard for more than 45 minutes. In this industry, a 2-degree deviation can turn pallets of inventory into potential liabilities. The disturbing part was that the error had happened 4 times in 2 days. Every warning email had been routed to the new management team, but no one followed the correct protocol. The only person who truly understood the system was sitting more than 1,000 miles away. What I had predicted was now unfolding. When I was there, even a half-degree shift would have sent me to the site before the night staff arrived. But now, Chloe looked at the sensor dashboard like someone staring at a toy with too many buttons, and Gregory cared only about protecting his image regardless of what the data was screaming. That morning, an FDA inspector called the Boston office directly, demanding a surprise inspection after receiving irregular data from the national monitoring system. I could picture the team scrambling, rifling through documents I had once organized into neat, logical order. The HACCP reports I had built through dozens of sleepless nights were now in the hands of someone who could not tell which procedures required signatures and which required federal clearance. While I waited for my interview, Gregory's assistant sent another message to the old inbox. Chloe had misread the temperature trend chart, assuming it was a software glitch and ignoring the red warning bar. I could imagine her standing in the control room holding a stack of papers, not knowing which page mattered. And I could imagine the look on Gregory's face as he realized the precision he once thought was automatic had always been the work of the person he pushed out the door. Less than 3 hours after the inspection began, the FDA decided to hold the entire shipment bound for New York due to suspected temperature instability. That shipment was worth more than $130,000, not including contracts tied to major restaurant chains in Manhattan. Once a shipment is held, revalidation can take days or even weeks, depending on the level of concern. Each passing hour is a massive cost the company must carry. Then the customer front collapsed. 3 high-end restaurants sent letters suspending partnership indefinitely, stating they could not risk their reputation over an operational failure. In the food industry, losing trust is losing everything. The moment one client departs, others need only the slightest excuse to follow. The Boston authorities, already sensitive after years of food safety incidents, began flagging the company as high risk. Local news stations reported the story with the speed of neighborhood gossip. Several outlets cited internal sources, stating that the company made a critical mistake by handing operations to someone inexperienced. One paper, the Boston Daily, used the word nepotism at the top of its business section. I did not take satisfaction in it, but I was not surprised. Reality arrives on time, especially when driven by data and federal law. Gregory was suspended within 24 hours of the FDA's arrival. The board temporarily assigned control to a director from the New Jersey branch, someone I knew had complained about Gregory's competence more than once, but had never dared say it aloud. As for Chloe, according to a colleague who still updated me quietly, she had broken down to the point of leaving the office early 2 days in a row. She was not malicious. She had simply been placed in a chair she had never been prepared to sit in. I looked at Lake Michigan again. The cold wind moved across the smooth water like a sheet of glass. Chicago did not care about Boston's chaos. And honestly, I had chosen not to care either. My phone kept vibrating, but I let the screen light up and fade like signals from a ship calling to a harbor that had already closed. For the first time in years, I allowed myself a full breath. No alarms from cold storage, no calls at 2 in the morning, no instinct to patch every leak someone else had left uncovered. If things were collapsing, it was not because I made them fall. It was simply because I was no longer there to hold them up. I arrived in New York on a rare, clear morning. It was only April, yet Central Park was greener than I remembered. The trip had never been part of my plans. My new company in Chicago sent me to a federal cold chain standards conference, mostly to meet a few new partners. I sat in the lobby outside the convention center holding a cup of hot tea, feeling surprisingly at ease. My phone kept lighting up with messages from Boston's collapse, but I no longer had to answer. In the middle of that calm, I heard a familiar voice behind me, soft and hesitant enough that I almost thought I imagined it. Elise. I turned. Chloe was standing there. Her face looked thinner, her eyes stripped of the bright, naive confidence she had on her first day in my office. She wore a simple white shirt, her hair tied low, not the polished image someone crafted for her, the image of a person who had taken a few hard falls and had to rise on her own. I nodded in greeting, the quiet gesture I reserve for people who once passed through my life without leaving behind bitterness. You are attending the conference. Yes. I am helping a friend manage a booth. I saw your name on the speaker list and waited. I was not sure you would come. The way she stood was slightly closed in. Her voice was small, trembling. I invited her to sit in the chair across from me. When she set her bag down, I noticed her hands were still shaking. People can pretend well, but their hands never lie under pressure. Chloe looked at me for a long moment, then exhaled. I am sorry. I have wanted to say that for a long time. Not the kind of sorry people say to be polite, but the kind you say because you finally understand. I stayed silent so she could untangle her own words. I know why I was chosen. Everyone knows. I thought I could keep up. I thought a degree was enough, but the past 3 months have felt like standing in front of a machine that is exploding. I do not know how to stop it. I do not know how to adjust it. And I do not know how to save anyone from it. She lowered her head, her voice tight but not dramatic. Just true. I remembered her first day, polite and eager, but without battle experience. It had never been her fault. She had simply been placed in a role that demanded what textbooks could never teach. I spoke softly. You were not wrong. This system simply requires experience you have not had time to earn. People often mistake understanding for capability, but real work demands time, mistakes, and years in a cold room until your hands cannot feel anything. Chloe let out a faint, sad smile. My father is under internal investigation. They said his decision caused millions in losses. The press is writing about favoritism. Everything hit at once. He did not have time to build a shield. I said nothing. Gregory had never been malicious, just too certain of his own authority and blind to the weight of reality. A 2-degree deviation does not care who you are or who you are related to. It only cares that it can collapse an entire chain. Chloe continued, I know why you left. It was not the position, not the salary. It was because you were treated as less. I listened to the internal recording from the meeting you did not know they taped. I heard my father say you would obey because you needed money to care for your mother. I was angry for you, embarrassed for you, and ashamed of myself for standing there without understanding. I did not react. Some people need to face a real failure before they can see themselves. Chloe was no longer the girl with new shoes and a blank notebook. She sat before me as someone ready to begin again. I asked, Are you all right? I do not know, but I think I will be. I am applying for a quality control internship. From the beginning. No shortcuts, no favors, no expectations of being chosen. I just want to do things the right way. I believed her. Not because of her words, but because she had fallen in a way that forces a person to look inward. Not everyone gets the chance to grow honestly. Before standing up, she said one more thing. Elise, I know you did not sabotage anything, but your absence spoke louder than any action. No one could fill your place. Not because you were irreplaceable, but because they replaced you with the wrong person. I think sometimes collapse is the lesson everyone needs, even my father. I looked at her steadily and nodded. You grew up, Chloe, and that matters more than any title. When she left, I sat with my now lukewarm tea. My phone buzzed again. A message from the hospital in Chicago about my mother. They said she was stabilizing, responding well to the new medication. Slight progress, but promising. I read the words and felt my chest loosen. For the first time in months, I could breathe without bracing myself. I slipped the phone into my pocket. Outside, New York was its usual loud, cold, hurried self. But I felt calm. Some encounters remind you what fairness truly is. Not legal fairness, not media fairness, but the fairness of reality. Systems built wrong collapse. People placed wrongly are exposed. I stood to enter the auditorium. At the far end of the hall, the lights reflected off the stone floor, bright and cold, but not sad. I smiled faintly, feeling as though I had finally set down a burden I had carried without noticing. In the end, not every apology can rewrite the past, but sometimes they are enough to close a door quietly, and that quiet is its own kind of healing. I moved to Chicago on a morning when a thin layer of mist drifted over the lake. This city was different from Boston in many ways, but the biggest difference was not in the tall buildings or the steel bridges that crossed the river. It was in the quiet relief spreading through my chest each time I walked into the new office, a place where I no longer had to explain my worth to anyone. The work was steady, the pay was noticeably higher, and most importantly, I felt respected. Not respected by compliments, but by the way they trusted my professional judgment and asked for my input before making any decision involving cold chain safety. I had always believed I did not need a spotlight. I only needed a place that knew how to listen. Chicago gave me that, and more. My colleagues here were serious about the craft. No one tried to hide mistakes under a layer of family connections. When I pointed out a small flaw in a process, they wrote it down carefully. No one told me, the way Gregory once did, that I should gently support the younger generation. Here, the younger generation worked like adults. No one expected me to build an entire system just so they could sit comfortably in a chair still warm from someone else's effort. On the first afternoon, I had some free time, so I took my mother for a walk along Lake Michigan. She held my hand, her steps slow but steady. Her illness had days that crushed me, but lately I noticed her eyes looked a little brighter, a little clearer, as if my own calm had somehow threaded itself into her. She did not remember everything, but she remembered me. That alone could keep me standing for a lifetime. We sat on a long bench facing the water, watching the gentle ripples. Seagulls drifted across the sky as if they had their own schedules no one needed to approve. My mother leaned her head against my shoulder, and I saw our silhouettes reflected on the surface of the lake. A peaceful image, one that told me I had chosen the right direction. I did not feel triumphant thinking about Gregory or the investigations still unfolding in Boston. I did not feel joy remembering Chloe's panic that day in the conference room when I said goodbye. There was no sense of victory, no lingering hunger for revenge, only calm. A calm that comes when you understand that real worth does not need to shout, nor does it need anyone to validate it. True worth rises on its own whenever someone tries to bury it. I once thought that leaving a place I had given more than a decade to would leave me empty, but in truth, it was that place that had emptied me. The years I spent saving them from crisis had been treated as routine, something expected. When Chloe apologized in New York, I understood something important. Sometimes collapse does not require someone to push. It only requires the person who held everything together to step aside. From Chicago, I looked back at Boston the way one looks at an old city they once took the wrong road through without realizing it, until one day they choose a different turn and discover cleaner, brighter paths untouched by anyone's shadow. I placed my hand over my mother's and smiled. My journey was not finished, but it had entered a new chapter, one where I no longer needed permission to do what was right, a chapter where I could stand tall without someone renaming my work to fit their narrative. If you have listened this far, perhaps you too have lived something like this, whether in an office, a family, or simply among people who could not see your true value. If this story speaks to you, I invite you to subscribe. At our age, we are not looking for noise. We are looking for the truth. And sometimes the truth speaks quietly, just loud enough for the ones